Everybody's got to be somewhere, but for the homeless in America, the where is becoming a real problem.
So we're basically, a community at war within itself over this issue.
And did you say at one point there were homeless people sleeping in 15 parks?
Yeah, we had people in all of our city parks. That just wasn't an ideal place for people to be.
This week, the Supreme Court ruling that offers a blueprint for communities across America on how to handle the homeless crisis.
So it looks like we're coming into an area that's pretty charred up here.
So this is the Crooked Creek fire.
In the Carolina mountains, one natural disaster is creating the fear of another.
Well, for me, it's almost a daily grieving.
This week, the aftermath of Helene and the danger of the wildfires to come.
I deployed the U.S. military and Border Patrol to repel the invasion of our country. And what a job they've done.
President Trump's actions on our southern border have all but stopped the flow of illegal immigrants into the U.S. This week, Scott Thuman reports from Panama on the efforts to shut down a human trafficking superhighway. Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. As you probably know, America is in the midst of a homeless crisis. The number of homeless, to the extent it can be counted, recently reached the highest on record, numbering more than 650,000. The impact is felt in big cities and even some smaller towns. One of them is Grants Pass, Oregon, where a landmark court case exposed a fierce divide over how to handle the homeless. Like any homeless camp in America,
so this is the J Street encampment.
There are as many different stories as there are people to tell them.
This is Tinsel. I lost my job due to my depression and to the point to where I couldn't even do my job anymore.
And for all of you, where's your next meal going to come from?
Probably the feed that comes here about 2 o'clock.
This camp is in Grants Pass, Oregon, a 4-hour drive south of Portland, and an unlikely center point in a tug of war between the rights of the homeless versus the rights of residents who want them cleared from public areas. Ed Johnson represents the homeless as a lawyer for the nonprofit Oregon Law Center.
How did this become a case that was litigated in court?
So we started to hear from people back in 2017 that they were being approached by law enforcement and told there's nowhere you're allowed to be in town. And the fines were $295 a pop, which not surprisingly, if you're living outside, might as well be $1 million. And so we ended up representing a group of people who had been living in Grants Pass for years who had faced these criminal penalties for living outside.
The lawsuit on behalf of the homeless was filed in 2018. Initially, the court ruled it was cruel and unusual punishment for Grants Pass to arrest or ticket people sleeping outside if they had nowhere else to go.
So we're basically, a community at war within itself over this issue.
Sarah Bristol was mayor of Grants Pass as the controversy and homeless population grew.
And did you say at one point there were homeless people sleeping in 15 parks?
Yeah, we had people in all of our city parks, and those parks are all in residential neighborhoods. They're near schools, and so that just wasn't an ideal place for people to be.
Grants Pass was forced to let the homeless live in the parks for years while it challenged the lawsuit. Drugs, needles, and other safety issues chased residents out. Clint Scherf is a local businessman.
You think the lawsuit, to some degree or maybe totally, caused a crisis here because it advertised that Grants Pass now was letting people sleep in the park?
My personal opinion is that, yes, that is the root of the explosion of the homeless population. So that, on top of having a beautiful park to live in, I believe, my personal opinion is that that put a big neon sign outside on I-5 to our first 2 exits.
Then last summer, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Grants Pass.
The issue was whether or not local governments can punish people for living outside when they have nowhere else to live. And specifically whether the cruel and unusual punishment clause of the 8th Amendment prohibited cities from doing that. And the Supreme Court held 6-3 that the cruel and unusual punishment clause does not prevent cities from doing that.
The Supreme Court decision allowed the injunction to be removed, and so we were able to move homeless people out of our parks.
The lawsuit outcome here in Grants Pass has offered the beginnings of a blueprint to other communities across the country as to how they'll be allowed to handle their own homeless crises.
But the more you do provide,
But Bristol, then the mayor, says that just opened up a new divide over what to do next. She wanted the city to establish new low-barrier shelters that allow pets as well as people who are drinking or using drugs.
I do feel strongly that we need to have places where people can be. And unfortunately, we still don't have a low-barrier homeless shelter, and that's just part of this community trying to come to terms with how to handle this situation.
Other residents want no part of paying for new shelters. And in the first election after the Supreme Court decision last fall, there was a major changeover in the Grants Pass City Council.
The implications were a new city council, that we had 4 city councilors and myself out of office earlier.
Do you think all of you all were voted out largely over this issue?
2 of the councilors didn't run again, and then 2 were running for re-election, as well as myself, and yeah, I'm sure it had absolutely everything to do with this issue.
In the upheaval, Clint Scherf was elected as the new mayor of Grants Pass. He was sworn in just before our visit. He says it's enough that there's already a religious-run shelter in town with plenty of open beds.
So we have a gospel rescue mission that services men and women, mainly men, that is 75% empty, not full, empty. And it's because it does have higher barriers, meaning that you can't smoke, you can't do drugs on the premises, meaning that they don't want to change their ways, they don't want to change their activities, they don't want to change their nature.
So is it accurate to say the city has the green light to move homeless people out of the parks, but there's not really a solution yet as to what to do with them?
Correct. Basically, it says that the city will have to come up with objectable and reasonable accommodations for them, or something, and not just kick them out. You can't go up and
you still have to take care of them.
No, it doesn't state that you have to take care of them. It states that you have to basically be reasonably and objective in how you relocate them. And what that means to me as local government leaders, we need to try to work with all the community resources that we possibly can, which in our case will be the churches, will be the nonprofits, anybody that wants to help.
The mission.
Why not go there?
Because I have 2 dogs that I refuse to get rid of. They are pretty much my service animals. I will not get rid of them at all.
I've been homeless now about 4.5 years, off and on. I've had places to stay, but I just, I don't really be locked up. And like the one in Medford, they lock you down at nighttime. They close the gates, they lock them, they have you on curfews and everything else. And I just didn't feel like I wanted to be there.
We're going to bring this meeting to order.
At its first meeting, the new city council quickly took on the issue of whether to close the 2 relocation camps in Grants Pass.
Where are they supposed to go? They aren't there because of the weather being good. They're there because they have nowhere else to go. It is not just drug use and mental illness. It is poverty. Poverty should not be a crime in this community.
The majority of the people that are unhoused in Grants Pass aren't homeless. They're just not allowed home because of their addiction to drugs.
The council voted to close one of the 2 relocation sites and limit hours at the second. Cassie Leach is a homeless advocate.
The hours there are going to be 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. So, and then that's how I understand it now.
Will people have to move their tents in the day then?
Correct.
So what happens then, do you think? What is your best guess is what's going to happen?
That's the big question, and that's kind of what the community is asking City Council is what's next. Where are they going to go during the day, and how is it going to impact our community and businesses?
For now, the public parks in Grants Pass are safe and clean again and free of the homeless encampments. But far from being an end to the problem, it's only the next chapter in a complex dilemma faced by communities around the country.
For more on this story, you can listen to my podcast, Full Measure After Hours. When we come back, rebuilding North Carolina after Hurricane Helene. As North Carolina struggles to rebuild after Hurricane Helene, an unexpected complication has surfaced that stands to make matters more dangerous. It has to do with all the kindling inadvertently created in the aftermath. Lisa Fletcher reports.
First, there were the floods that swamped towns and the high winds that knocked forests to the ground. Now the state is facing catastrophic fires, more devastating because of the storm's aftermath.
Breaking right now at 5, emergency crews in Old Fort have ordered local residents to evacuate as an out-of-control wildfire spreads with zero containment.
Fire season has come early to the Carolina mountains. Low humidity and millions of downed trees across some 800,000 acres left in the wake of Hurricane Helene have created a tinderbox of well more than 1,000 square miles. It's an enormous task, a challenge witnessed by new Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins.
Driving up into the hills to see it, the devastation in terms of the trees that were knocked over and the fuel that is added, because it creates a scenario where the fires can spread more quickly and where they have more timber to burn through. So it is a significant challenge that our teams are working through.
7 million tons of downed and drying trees have put state forestry fire crews on edge.
So it looks like we're coming into an area that's pretty charred up here.
So this is the Crooked Creek fire. It started last Wednesday.
Chris Sharpton is the state's regional fire manager.
It's a good-sized fire.
Absolutely, especially for this time of year.
That fire came under control just days before our arrival. Others ignited, burning 1,000 acres.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg, to be honest with you.
In the years ahead, it is likely that western North Carolina and multiple states in the southeast will experience more intense fire seasons because of the scale of the downed timber.
The most severe damage is on the upper slopes of ridge tops and mountain tops, where typically those forests are dominated by oaks and hickories. Those species deteriorate much more slowly than southern yellow pine, yellow poplar, and red maple.
You're talking about this stuff isn't going to rot out very fast, so it's going to remain as a good fuel source for fires for longer.
Right. We're in an area where our fuel conditions have changed, and they're going to be much different for the next 10, 15, maybe even 20 years.
To give you a sense of how big the problem is, this is just one of 100 piles of logs that have been salvaged from just this spot of land. And this is just scratching the surface. In fact, in a neighboring county, more than 1/3 of the forest is on the ground after Hurricane Helene.
And it's not just a physical threat, but a financial one, too. Helene caused some $4.1 billion in direct damage to North Carolina's agriculture sector, which includes public and private forests, much of which are so dense and difficult to access that even removal by helicopter, like what was done in 1990 after Hurricane Hugo in South Carolina, is nearly impossible.
When Hugo hit South Carolina, there was a lot of work to take debris out of the way, even airlifting some debris. Would that be helpful in North Carolina to see some of that scale of debris removal?
Particularly in areas surrounding homes, it's not really feasible to go through the woods and pick up some of this debris.
And with the amount of debris far beyond the financial and physical ability of the state to address, the people living in the mountain communities are living in fear of a second disaster.
Well, for me, it's almost a daily grieving.
Jennifer Boyce has called this valley, 20 minutes from downtown Asheville, home for 46 years and says she lost between 200 and 300 trees on her property alone. This is the view from her porch before the storm and after.
It's kind of a double whammy for you, too, because you had the devastation from Helene, and then you have the debris from Helene, which creates a whole new problem with wildfires.
That's true.
So, where does an impending disaster stack up against one that has yet to be fully repaired? Or, to quote one famous North Carolina songwriter, who will cover the costs for those who have seen both fire and rain?
Does North Carolina get the kinds of resources it needs to have such a high rank in terms of its vulnerability to wildfires? Or do you guys need more?
So we actually do have quite a few asks of both the federal government and state government for funding for more positions, more equipment, basically things to support the increased fuel loading. So we have the capability to mitigate some of these hazardous fuels.
Did North Carolina ever get much federal or FEMA money for recovery? We heard about all the controversy.
Right. Well, FEMA told us that there was about $400 million allocated for North Carolina residents after Helene. Most of that has already been distributed. But Governor Josh Stein is asking the Trump administration for an additional $19 billion, which would go for Helene recovery, and they would also go to prevent future wildfires.
Wow, that's a lot more.
It is.
Thanks, Lisa. Coming up on Full Measure, closing an illegal immigration superhighway. In the first full month of President Trump's second term, Border Patrol encounters with illegal border crossers dropped 96% from the year before, with deportations reportedly reaching more than 37,000. But preventing people from ever reaching America's southern border in the first place can save suffering and even lives. Now there's a renewed push to close the notorious Darien Gap. Scott Thuman reports from Panama.
It has been Donald Trump's signature issue since the start of his political rise. And he's begun his second term with fast action and striking results.
Within hours of taking the oath of office, I declared a national emergency on our southern border, and I deployed the U.S. military and Border Patrol to repel the invasion of our country. And what a job they've done.
Preliminary figures for February 2025 show a plunge in illegal immigrant crossings to levels not seen in 25 years, with Border Patrol apprehending just under 8,500 people during the month. For comparison, during some months of the Biden administration, 8,500 were being apprehended on a given day. But the focus isn't just at the border. It's also on routes the migrants take through Central America.
To get to the U.S., hundreds of thousands come through here, the tiny Central American country of Panama. But for migrants, it is also one of the most dangerous legs of their journey.
We saw firsthand just how difficult and dangerous the trip can be when we visited Panama's Darien province back in 2023. At this makeshift camp, migrants emerge from the notorious Darien Gap, a thick and imposing jungle with no roads, where travelers pay hundreds of dollars to so-called coyotes to lead them through. It is the only land path option, but migrants face violence and extortion along the way. Reports of deaths and rapes are common. Jessica from Ecuador came through with her 11-month-old and 6-year-old boys.
The crossing was very difficult, with lots of swamps. Your feet sink in the ground. We had to climb many rocks, sometimes like this, sometimes in the sun.
I asked if she saw people sick or dying.
Yes, in our path there was a person that had died. I don't know the cause, but they died. Another lady died too because the rocks fall off. She fell from a tall height and died.
President Trump's return to office has put Panama's position along the migrant path back into focus. New border czar Tom Homan says that is about to change.
We want to shut the Darien Gap down. Would you work with the Panamanian government? Would you send the U.S. military to shut it down? We're always going to work with a foreign government, but it needs to happen. We'll save thousands of lives.
But relations between the U.S. and the government here in Panama have been strained recently over the issue of the Panama Canal. Trump is threatening to retake control of the vital waterway. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited in February for face-to-face talks. Those talks found common ground on at least one issue. Panama's president also says he wants to close the Darien Gap.
I won't allow Panama to be an open path for thousands of people who enter our country illegally, supported by an international organization related to drug trafficking and human trafficking.
Trump's aggressive policies, a hot topic of discussion among some of the Panamanians we met, including businessman Circe Pierpoint.
We suffered first Colombian and then Venezuelan immigration. 10% of Venezuela has left the country. They've come through here, through the Darien, on their way north. So there's a lot of spillover effects.
In recent weeks, reports started to emerge of migrants reversing their journeys, making their way back south to Colombia and Venezuela.
If you ask the average Panamanian, they love the fact that Trump is back in power because he wants to do something in this neighborhood that needs some attention.
Closing this route won't be easy or quick. In fact, one of the heads of Human Rights Watch said it'd be, quote, virtually impossible, and would only push people to take more dangerous risks. But as we found, many here say the flow must be stopped and won't happen without first closing the gap. For Full Measure, I'm Scott Thuman in Panama.
And after a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, the message to federal employees from President Trump and Elon Musk is the party's over. They're making big cuts to the federal workforce and pledging to put a stop to halt lenient telework policies, and the fallout is pouring in. What do you foresee in the next 4 or even 10 years as a result of what's going to happen in the next 4 years if government is significantly downsized, as this administration says it intends to do?
It will be an absolute disaster in this country.
Slashing the federal workforce on the next Full Measure. Don't forget to check out my national bestseller, Follow the Science, How Big Pharma Misleads, Obscures, and Prevails. And check out our Full Measure YouTube channel for replays of our segments and stories. See you next week.